What's the most bizarre way you've earned money? My mother rented me and my sister out to grieving families to pretend to be their dead daughters for thousands of dollars per week. I was 12 when I did my first assignment pretending to be a drowned girl named Amy. Her parents dressed me in clothes that still smelled like lake water and made me sit through family dinners where they'd quiz me on her memories I'd been forced to learn. My sister was 14 and had already done this for 2 years. Mom would drill us for weeks before each assignment, making us practice the dead girls' laugh and memorize their diary entries. Mom had 3 rules that she beat into us: never break character, never contact anyone during assignments, and never tell the truth. She'd drop us off with a suitcase and pick us up when the family was done with us or couldn't pay anymore. Between assignments, we lived in this crappy motel where she'd immediately start training us for the next dead girl. She had contacts at funeral homes who'd slip her photos and info about desperate families. The directors got a cut for every referral. By 16, I'd been 12 different dead girls. Some families wanted me for days, others for months. They'd test me on diary entries and sob when I recited them perfectly. "Remember when you wrote this about that boy from chemistry?" they'd ask, and I'd have to describe feelings I'd never felt about someone I'd never met. I kept a count of girls I'd been scratched into the motel bathroom cabinet. 47 marks by the time I turned 17. I tried escaping 4 times over the years. First time I just walked out during an assignment, but the family caught me 3 blocks away and dragged me back thinking their daughter was having another breakdown. Mom had given them emergency contacts and a whole story about mental illness. She picked me up early and punished me by making me sleep in the car trunk for a week. Second time I made it to a bus station, but Mom had reported me as a runaway. The cops brought me straight back to the family who installed locks on my windows. Third time I tried climbing down from a second-story window using bed sheets. The sheets tore and I broke my ankle in the fall. The family found me crawling across their lawn, and Mom convinced them their daughter had attempted suicide. They put me on constant watch, and Mom started lacing my food to keep me docile. Fourth time I saved up the sedatives and took them all at once, hoping the hospital would help me. But Mom showed up with fake medical power of attorney papers and took me back the second I was stable. After that, she started making me wear a GPS tracker sewn into my clothes. Between assignments, Mom's punishments got more creative. She'd make us practice being dead by lying still for hours. If we moved, she'd hit us with wire hangers until we learned to stay corpse still. She'd scream that we were worthless without our dead girls, that nobody would want the real us. My sister started hurting herself, and Mom just said to do it where the families wouldn't see. She stopped talking even between assignments. We were both ghosts pretending to be ghosts. I started forgetting my own name sometimes and would panic trying to remember who I really was. Then came the Walkers. Their daughter Lily had died falling down the stairs, but something felt wrong the second I saw her photos. Bruises that didn't match the fall. A scared look in her eyes even when she was smiling. Mom noticed too, but took the job anyway because they were paying triple her usual rate. Mr. Walker met us at the door, and the way he looked at me in Lily's clothes made my skin crawl. "Perfect," he said, handing Mom an envelope thick with cash. "She's absolutely perfect." Mrs. Highwalker was sedated out of her mind at dinner, barely conscious. Mr. Walker made me sit in Lily's exact spot and tested me on everything: her favorite foods, her friends' names, the way she held her fork. When I got something wrong, he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks. "Lily would never forget that," he said, his fingers digging in deeper. Mrs. Walker just stared at her plate, hands shaking. That night, I found Lily's real diary hidden behind her dresser, not the edited one Mom had given me to study. The entries were terrifying. Years of her dad getting worse, more controlling, more violent. The final entry was dated the night before she died. "He knows I'm planning to run tomorrow. I'm scared." On the 4th night, Mrs. Walker snuck into my room more sober than I'd seen her. She was crying and shaking. "I know you're not really Lily," she whispered. "I'm not stupid, but you need to run right now. He killed her when she tried to leave, and he's planning something worse for you." She pressed money into my hand and pushed me toward the window. "Go now while he's sleeping. Don't let him do to you what he did to her." But when I got downstairs, Mr. Walker was waiting in the dark. "Your mother and I have an arrangement," he said, stepping into the light. "I decided one's not quite enough, so she's bringing your sister tomorrow. We'll be one big happy family." Through the window, I saw Mom's car already pulling up. It was 3 in the morning, but there was my sister in the back seat, probably sedated for the delivery. Mr. Walker smiled and pulled something from his pocket. Lily's necklace, still caked with dried blood. "Your mother says you're orphans anyway. No one will miss you. No one will even look." As Mom walked my sister to the door, Mr. Walker grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head back. "Lily always wanted sisters. Now she'll have them forever. Or at least until you try to run too." His fingers twisted harder in my hair, and he yanked me toward the basement door while Mom pushed my sister through the front entrance. My scalp felt like it was on fire, but I made myself go limp like a rag doll. Through my tears, I could see a phone on the kitchen wall and an alarm panel blinking red by the door. Mom dropped my sister on the couch like she was just a piece of furniture she was delivering. My sister's head rolled to the side, and her eyes were barely open from whatever drugs Mom had given her. Mom counted the cash Mr. Walker had handed her earlier, flipping through the bills twice to make sure it was all there. She didn't even look at me while he was dragging me around by my hair. She just reminded him about the mental illness story she'd written up if anyone asked questions about us. Then she walked out the door without looking back once. Mr. Walker let go of my hair and went to the front door, turning 3 different locks one after another. The alarm panel beeped as he punched in a code and armed the whole system. He made us both sit at the dinner table even though my sister could barely hold her head up. He started asking us questions about Lily, getting madder every time we got something wrong or took too long to answer. He wanted to know her best friend's middle name and what she ate for breakfast on her 10th birthday. When I couldn't remember the name of her first grade teacher fast enough, he slammed his hand on the table so hard the glasses jumped. My sister tried to answer, but the words came out all slurred and wrong from the drugs. That first night, he pushed us into Lily's room and locked the door from the outside. I could hear him walking back and forth in the hallway for hours, his footsteps never stopping. I checked on my sister, who was passed out cold on the bed, her breathing slow but steady machete. The room smelled like vanilla perfume and there were stuffed animals everywhere, like Lily had been way younger than she really was. I checked every single inch of that room looking for a way out. The windows had new locks drilled into the frames and metal bars screwed on the outside that you could see through the glass. The closet had no back panel that might lead to another room, just solid wall. Even the heating vent was screwed down with special screws that needed a weird tool to open. The next morning I heard him moving around early, so I pretended to still be sleepy and slow. I watched him through half-closed eyes as he went through his whole morning routine. First, he checked every door in the house, testing each lock twice before moving to the next one. Then he went to a cabinet in the kitchen that had its own lock and took out a bottle of pills. He shook out 2 white ones for himself and swallowed them dry. After that, he went to Mrs. Walker, who was sitting at the breakfast table staring at nothing. He put 3 different pills in front of her and stood there until she swallowed every single one with her orange juice. She looked right at me while she was swallowing them, and her eyes were begging for something, but she didn't say a word. Later, when he was in the bathroom, I found more pages from Lily's real diary stuffed behind her bookshelf. These pages talked about how scared she was and how she knew something bad was going to happen soon. I folded each page as tiny as I could, making them into little squares no bigger than my thumbnail. Then I pulled threads from the bed sheets and used them to sew the pages into the lining of my clothes. I made tiny stitches along the seams where nobody would think to look. These pages were proof of what really happened to Lily, and I needed to keep them safe no matter what. Over the next few days, I memorized every part of that house while pretending to be the perfect grieving daughter. The bathroom window opened to a flat part of the roof that connected to the garage. The basement had a vent that led to the side yard, but it was painted shut. The garage had a door to the outside that might not be hooked to the alarm system. I shared all this with my sister using our old finger tap code we'd made up years ago at the motel. 2 taps meant yes, 3 meant danger, 1 long press meant wait. She was getting less drugged each day and started tapping back to let me know she understood. There's something deeply wrong about a mother who turns her own kids into products she can sell to the highest bidder. The way she just counts that cash while Mr. Walker drags her daughter around by the hair, that tells me everything about where while Mr. Walker was in the shower on the 4th day, I used nail clippers from Lily's dresser to carefully cut the GPS tracker out of my clothes. The thread Mom had used was thick, but the clippers were sharp enough to slice through it. I took one of his jackets from the hall closet and sewed the tracker into the inside pocket, using thread from Lily's sewing kit. If Mom checked where we were, it would look like we were wherever he was. During dinner that night, I watched Mrs. Walker taking her pills and noticed something important. She put them in her mouth and pretended to swallow, but I could see her tongue moving them to her cheek. Later, when her husband went to the bathroom, she spit them into her napkin. Her eyes were getting clearer every day, and she started making tiny movements when he wasn't looking. She'd tap her fingers on the table or move her foot in a pattern like she was trying to tell me something. On the 5th night, I went to the bathroom and saw the phone on the wall in the hallway. Mr. Walker was downstairs watching TV and my sister was in the bedroom. I picked up the phone and dialed 911 as fast as I could, then hung up right away. The phone rang back less than 30 seconds later and Mr. Walker came running up the stairs. He grabbed the phone and told them his daughter had hit the button by accident while reaching for something. He was using this fake calm voice, but his face was turning red and the veins in his neck were sticking out. After he hung up, he grabbed my arm so hard I knew it would leave bruises. The next morning, my sister's eyes tracked me across the room for the first time in days, and when I tapped twice on her hand under the breakfast table, she tapped back. Her fingers were weak, but she managed 2 clear taps, then 3 when Mr. Walker walked behind us, and I knew she was fighting through whatever Mom had given her. We practiced more that afternoon while he was on the phone, working out a system where 2 taps meant she was with me, 3 meant danger, and 1 long press meant wait. The day after that, Mr. Walker made me take out the trash, and I saw my chance when he stayed at the window watching me. I'd written, "Call 911, domestic hostage situation," on toilet paper with Lily's old eyeliner, and folded it tiny in my pocket. The neighbor's yard was just over the fence, and I dropped the paper while pretending to struggle with a heavy bag, watching it flutter over into their grass. Mr. Walker kept watching, but from his angle, he couldn't see where the paper landed. 3 days later, I burned the toast on purpose, filling the kitchen with smoke until the alarm screamed. Mr. Walker came running, and his first reaction wasn't to check the fire, but to look out the windows at the neighbors' houses, terrified someone would notice. He yanked the alarm off the ceiling and threw it in the trash, muttering about nosy people who needed to mind their own business. That same afternoon, while he was on a long phone call about work, Mrs. Walker shuffled past me in the hallway and pressed something small and cold into my palm. It was a pair of nail scissors from her bathroom, tiny but sharp. I used them that night to cut the last threads holding my tracker, then kept them hidden in my sock. The next day, when Mr. Walker bent over to check the locks, I pretended to trip and grabbed his tool belt for balance, sliding the tracker into one of the pouches while apologizing over and over. He shoved me away but didn't notice the extra weight on his belt. At dinner that night, he made us all sit in our assigned spots and practice being a normal family, testing us on Lily's memories while Mrs. Walker pushed food around her plate. I watched his fingers punch in the alarm code when we first sat down, memorizing the pattern, 4-7-2-9-1-3. He was so focused on making sure I held my fork exactly like Lily that he never noticed me studying his hand movements. Later, I found an old tablet shoved under Lily's bed that still had battery and a voice recorder app. The next morning, when Mr. Walker cornered us in the kitchen and started screaming about what happens to girls who try to run, how Lily learned that lesson the hard way, I managed to hit the record button in my pocket. His whole rant about teaching us to be good daughters, about how nobody would believe us anyway because Mom's paperwork said we were mentally ill, all of it got captured on that tablet. My sister was alert enough by then to help me search Lily's room while he was in the garage. We found the bloodied necklace he'd shown me that first night hidden in an old shoebox in the closet, along with strands of hair that looked ripped out. We wrapped everything carefully in tissue paper, and I sewed it into the lining of Lily's Lily's winter coat that hung in the back of the closet. The neighbor must have found my note because I started seeing him outside more often, trimming bushes that didn't need trimming, walking his dog past our house 4 times a day instead of 2. He had a little notebook, and I saw him writing whenever Mr. Walker's car left or came back. Mr. Walker noticed too and got paranoid, rushing to install heavy blackout curtains on every window, even the small bathroom one. That night while he was sleeping, I crept to his nightstand where he always left his phone charging. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the emergency button, but I managed to whisper, 2 minors held hostage, before his breathing changed and I had to run back to bed. The call log showed it went through for 14 seconds. Another piece of evidence that something was wrong at this house. Mrs. Walker stopped taking her pills completely after that, spitting them into tissues when her husband looked away, and her eyes got sharper every day. She started leaving kitchen knives in weird places when he wasn't around, tucked behind the toaster or under the dish towel by the sink. One morning while he was reading his newspaper and complaining about something in local news, she looked right at me and mouthed the words, "Be ready," so clearly I couldn't mistake them. Something was shifting in that house and we all felt it, even Mr. Walker, who started checking the locks twice as often and installed a camera in the hallway. My sister and I kept collecting evidence, adding to our hidden stash whenever we could, knowing that soon we'd need every piece of proof we could get. Mr. Walker came into the kitchen the next morning while we were eating breakfast and dropped a bombshell on us. "Pack your things because we're moving to my cabin in the mountains next week." My stomach dropped because a remote cabin meant no neighbors and no escape routes. He kept talking about how nice it would be to have privacy as a family while I tried not to panic. That afternoon while he was in the garage, I wrote everything down on paper, every detail about what was happening to us. I folded it as small as I could and added some of the cash Mrs. Walker had given me earlier. When I took the trash out, I tossed the note into the neighbor's mailbox and prayed he would find it soon. That night, my sister started shaking and gasping for air, a full panic attack that had her clutching her chest. I begged Mr. Walker to call an ambulance, but he just dragged us both down to the basement instead. "She just needs some quiet time," he said while locking the heavy door behind us. The basement was cold and dark, but I remembered the vent I'd noticed during my earlier exploration of the house. My sister was still breathing hard, but she helped me drag an old table under the vent opening. Mrs. Walker's scissors were still in my pocket, and we started working on the screws holding the vent cover in place. The metal was old and painted over, so each screw took forever to loosen. Our fingers got cut and bloody from the sharp edges, but we kept working through the pain. Hours passed, and we finally got 3 corners loose enough to bend the cover back. The opening looked just big enough for us to squeeze through if we went one at a time. I boosted my sister up first, and she was halfway through when the basement door slammed open. Mr. Walker thundered down the stairs and grabbed my sister's legs, yanking her back down so hard she hit the concrete floor. He was screaming about ungrateful daughters and how we were just like Lily, always trying to leave him. Mrs. Walker appeared in the doorway behind him, more alert than I'd seen her in days. While he ranted about teaching us respect, I grabbed the scissors and scratched "Not Lily" deep into my forearm where she could see it. Blood welled up immediately, and Mrs. Walker's face went from shock to something harder, more determined. She disappeared from the doorway while her husband kept yelling about how we belonged to him now. A minute later, she came back holding the cordless phone like a weapon. She brought it down hard on the back of his head, and he stumbled forward, stunned but not unconscious. "Run!" she screamed, shoving the phone into my hands as we scrambled past him toward the stairs. The phone showed 911 already dialed and connected, so I gasped out our address while we ran. Mr. Walker was already recovering and chasing us up the stairs, his footsteps heavy behind us. We made it to the front door, but I remembered the alarm system and deliberately punched in the wrong code. Once, twice, 3 times until the system started shrieking, and I knew the duress signal would bring police automatically. We burst outside into the cool night air and found several neighbors already on their lawns. The alarm had woken everyone, and they were all staring at our house with concern and curiosity. The neighbor with the notebook was already on his phone, and I heard him telling someone about suspicious activity he'd been documenting. Mr. Walker came charging out after us, but stopped short when he saw all the witnesses watching. He tried to grab my sister anyway, but the neighbors moved forward, creating a barrier between us and him. "Stay back," one of them said firmly, while another held up their phone, recording everything that was happening. How did those sisters figure out all those clever tricks with the tracker and the evidence? The way they used tap codes and worked together while pretending to be someone else's daughter is incredible. I wonder if they planned it all or just got really good at thinking fast when things got dangerous. More neighbors kept coming out of their houses, and someone said the police were already on their way. We could hear sirens getting louder, and Mr. Walker's face went from angry to scared as he realized how bad this looked. 2 police cars pulled up first, then a third, their lights painting everything red and blue. The officers got out quickly and immediately started separating everyone to figure out what was going on. I handed the first officer Lily's diary pages that I'd kept hidden in my clothes all this time. Then I pulled out the bloody necklace wrapped in tissue and pointed to the scratches on my arm that still spelled out my message. I told him about the tablet upstairs with Mr. Walker's recorded threats and showed him all my injuries, old and new. My sister was shaking, but she rolled up her sleeves to show her own collection of bruises and marks. The officer's face got more serious with each piece of evidence, and he called for backup and detectives immediately. Mrs. Walker was talking to another officer, her words coming fast as she finally told the truth about everything. Mr. Walker kept trying to interrupt, claiming we were mentally ill, but the officers weren't buying it anymore. They had too much evidence, too many witnesses, and 2 terrified kids with obvious signs of abuse. The EMTs arrived and started checking us over while more police secured the house as a crime scene. The EMT shined a light in my sister's eyes and checked her pulse while another one wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm. They drew blood from both of us, and the first EMT frowned at how slowly my sister was responding to questions. She kept blinking and trying to focus, but her words came out slurred and confused. The EMT told the police officer that my sister showed clear signs of heavy sedation radiation and needed immediate medical care. They loaded us both into separate ambulances even though I said I was fine. The ride to the hospital felt like forever with the siren wailing and the EMT asking me questions about what drugs my sister might have taken. I told him about mom's pills and how she'd forced them down our throats before deliveries. At the hospital, they wheeled us into the emergency room where nurses hooked my sister up to monitors and started an IV. The beeping machines showed her heart rate was too slow and her blood pressure was dropping. A doctor came in and ordered more blood tests while nurses kept checking her pupils every few minutes. They moved us to a quieter room after the initial tests and posted a security guard outside our door. Mrs. Walker showed up about an hour later with bandages on her head where her husband had hit her. She sat with a detective in the corner and I could hear her telling him everything even though she was crying. She explained how her husband had killed Lily when she tried to run away and how he'd paid our mother for replacements. She told him about the drugs he made her take every day to keep her quiet and confused. The detective wrote everything down and had her sign papers agreeing to testify against both of them. She kept looking over at us and saying she was sorry over and over. About 3 hours later, Mom burst through the emergency room doors waving a folder full of papers. She was screaming about her parental rights and demanding we be released to her immediately. The security guard blocked her from entering our room while she shoved the fake medical documents in his face. 2 social workers appeared and told her the papers were being reviewed, but she couldn't see us yet. Mom got louder and started threatening to sue everyone while pulling out more fake custody papers. The detective who'd been talking to Mrs. Walker walked over and looked at Mom's documents for about 10 seconds. He pulled out handcuffs and told Mom she was under arrest for child trafficking, abuse, and fraud. She screamed that we were ungrateful brats who didn't appreciate everything she'd done for us. The detective just kept reading her rights while she thrashed and tried to pull away. They dragged her out, still yelling about how we'd ruined everything and would be nothing without her. A social worker came in after Mom was gone and sat down next to my bed with a clipboard. She explained that we'd be placed in emergency foster care once the doctors cleared us medically. She said they had families who specialized in helping kids who'd been through trauma like ours. I asked if we'd be separated, and she promised to keep us together if at all possible. She gave us each a bag with clean clothes, toothbrushes, and some snacks. The detective came back later and told us they'd found evidence at Mom's motel room connecting her to the funeral homes. He said directors at 3 different funeral homes had been selling information about grieving families to her. They were building cases against all of them and expected to shut down the whole network. He showed us photos they'd found of other girls Mom had trained over the years. Some looked familiar from the motel, but most were strangers who'd probably aged out or escaped somehow. My sister had been quiet through everything, just staring at the ceiling while machines beeped around her. Then suddenly she turned to me and whispered something so soft I almost missed it. It was my real name, the one Mom had forbidden us from using for so many years. I grabbed her hand and said her real name back, and we just kept repeating them to each other. We practiced saying our names like we were learning a new language we'd forgotten how to speak. The advocate showed up the next morning and explained all the charges they were filing. Mr. Walker faced murder charges for Lily plus kidnapping and assault charges for what he'd done to us. Mom was charged with trafficking, child abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The advocate said not every charge might stick, but there was enough evidence to keep them locked up during trial. She said we'd probably have to testify eventually, but it could be done over video, so we wouldn't have to see them. 3 days later, we were released from the hospital to an emergency foster family. They picked us up in a regular car, not a van or anything official looking. The foster mom explained they had clear rules posted on the refrigerator, and all the bedroom doors had locks we controlled ourselves. She showed us our room, which had 2 beds and a window that actually opened. She said we didn't have to talk about what happened until we were ready. They had a cat that immediately curled up on my sister's bed and started purring. The foster dad made spaghetti for dinner and didn't make us sit in assigned seats or quiz us on anything. We could eat as much or as little as we wanted without anyone watching every bite. The next few days, reporters started calling the foster home, but our foster parents wouldn't tell them anything. The advocate explained the court had issued protection orders to keep our names and faces out of the news. The stories just called us the sisters, which felt weird, but safer than having everyone know who we were. They set up therapy appointments for both of us with someone who specialized in trafficking survivors. My first session, I just sat there for 20 minutes unable to say anything, while the therapist waited patiently. She gave me paper and markers and said I could write or draw instead of talking if that felt easier. I wrote down one of the dead girls' names and then crossed it out over and over until the paper tore. My sister started art therapy the next week since talking was still too hard for her. The therapist gave her huge sheets of paper and boxes of pastels and told her to draw whatever came to mind. She drew that motel room first, every single detail perfect from the water stains on the ceiling to the broken handle on the bathroom door. She drew it 20 times that first session, each one exactly the same. The therapist watched without saying anything and just kept giving her more paper. Over the next few sessions, my sister started changing tiny things in her drawings. First, she added a crack in the wall that wasn't really there. Then she made the crack bigger. Then she drew light coming through it. By the 4th session, she was drawing windows in the motel walls, just small ones at first. The therapist hung all her drawings on the wall in order, and you could see the room slowly opening up, getting less dark. 3 months into foster care, we were doing better than I thought possible. We ate breakfast and dinner at the same time every day without anyone testing us on dead girls' memories. Our foster parents never pushed us to talk about what happened, but they made sure we knew the doors locked from the inside and we controlled the keys. They put a nightlight in the hallway after my sister had a panic attack in the dark. They stocked the kitchen with snacks we could take whenever we wanted without asking permission. We started online school because regular school felt too overwhelming with all those people. The computer work was easy compared to memorizing entire dead girls' lives. My sister would sit next to me doing her assignments, and sometimes she'd tap my arm twice, which meant she was okay. The detective called one morning to tell us they'd arrested the funeral home director who helped Mom find families. He'd been selling information about grieving parents for years, years, not just to mom but to other people running similar schemes. Another funeral director took a plea deal and agreed to testify about the whole network. The detective said they were finding more victims, other kids who'd been forced to pretend to be dead children. Some of them had been doing it even longer than us. The system that let this happen was finally getting torn apart piece by piece. 2 weeks later, the advocate brought us a letter from Mrs. Walker. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. She wrote that she was sorry for not protecting Lily and for letting her husband bring us into that house. Mrs. Walker writing that letter feels like such a small gesture after everything she let happen in her own home. I wonder if she really understands how much damage her silence caused, not just to these girls but to Lily too. She said she was in therapy now, finally facing what she'd let happen to her daughter. She promised to testify at every trial, to tell the truth about what her husband did to Lily and what he planned to do to us. She said she understood if we never wanted to hear from her again, but she needed us to know she took responsibility for everything. My sister read the letter 3 times, then folded it up tiny and kept it in her pocket. The victim advocate came to the foster home to explain the legal process since trials were coming up. She sat at the kitchen table with diagrams and timelines showing us exactly what would happen. She explained we could testify by video from a different room so we wouldn't have to see Mom or Mr. Walker in person. She said the prosecutor would ask us questions we'd already gone over, and we just had to tell the truth about what happened. She gave us stress balls to squeeze if we got scared during testimony. She said other kids who'd been through this said it helped to have something to hold. 4 months in, our foster parents asked if we wanted to talk about staying long term. They said they weren't trying to pressure us, but they wanted us to know we could stay as long as we needed, maybe even permanently if that's what we wanted. Nobody had ever asked us what we wanted before. Mom told us where to go and who to be. The families told us what dead girl to perform. These people were asking our opinion like it mattered. My sister grabbed my hand under the table and squeezed once for yes. I squeezed back and we both nodded at the same time. The foster mom's eyes got watery, but she just smiled and said she'd start the paperwork. I started remembering things about who I was before all the dead girls. The smell of strawberry shampoo I used to love before Mom made us use whatever the dead girls used. A song I knew all the words to that wasn't from any dead girls playlist. The way I used to write my name with a little heart over the I before Mom made me practice other girls' signatures. My therapist said recovering these memories was important, that I was taking back pieces of myself from all the fake identities. She had me write them down in a notebook that was just mine, not for anyone else to read. Each memory felt like finding something I thought was gone forever. My sister started talking more at night when it was just us in our room. Her voice was rusty from not using it, but she'd whisper about the girls she had to be. She'd been Stacy, who died in a car accident, Wendy, who drowned at summer camp, Madison, who had cancer. We made a list together of our real memories, the stuff that was actually ours, the time we found a hurt bird and tried to save it, the way Mom's car smelled like cigarettes and old coffee, the gas station where we'd stop between assignments. We wrote it all down so we wouldn't forget what was real and what was performance. 6 months after escape, the first trial date arrived. Mr. Walker faced charges for murdering Lily plus kidnapping and assault for what he did to us. We sat in a small room at the courthouse with the advocate and a camera pointed at us. On the screen we could see the courtroom, but they couldn't see us until it was time to testify. The prosecutor asked us about finding Lily's diary, about the bloody necklace, about Mr. Walker's threats. My sister managed to say 3 whole sentences about what happened, which was more than she'd said to any stranger in months. I told them everything, every detail I could remember about those days in that house. The defense lawyer tried to confuse us, but we just kept telling the truth. 3 weeks later, they reached a verdict. We watched on the video screen as they found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. When they read the verdict, my sister grabbed my hand and we both started crying. But they weren't sad tears. They were relief tears, knowing he could never hurt anyone else, never force another girl to pretend to be his dead daughter. The advocate hugged us and said we did great, that our testimony made the difference. Mom's trial was scheduled for the next month and we'd have to do it all over again, but at least now we knew we could. The month before Mom's trial, the prosecutor met with us 3 more times to go over our testimony and warned us it would be harder since she was our mother. Other families started coming forward after the news coverage, parents whose daughters Mom had rented us out to, and the prosecutor said they'd all be testifying too. The morning of the trial, my sister threw up twice from nerves and I had to help her get dressed because her hands were shaking too bad. We sat in the same video room as before, watching the courtroom fill up on the monitor. Mom looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her hair flat without all the products she used to use. The prosecutor went first, laying out years of abuse with photos of our injuries, the GPS trackers cut from our clothes, copies of the fake medical documents she'd made. Then came the other families, one after another, telling how Mom had coached us to be their dead daughters, how much they'd paid her, how she'd convinced them we had mental problems if we broke character. The mother of a girl named Rebecca said Mom had told her I was suicidal and needed constant watching, which is why she'd locked me in at night. Another family showed receipts for $30,000 they'd paid over 6 months. When it was our turn to testify, I told them about the wire hangers, the car trunk, making us practice being dead for hours. My sister managed to say 5 whole sentences about how Mom would drug us between assignments. The defense lawyer tried to argue Mom was protecting us from worse situations, that she'd kept us fed and housed, but the jury wasn't buying it. 3 days of testimony, and then we waited. The verdict came back guilty on all counts: trafficking, child abuse, fraud, conspiracy. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Mom screamed that she'd saved us from foster care, that we were nothing without her, that we'd end up on the streets. The judge gave her 25 years. Our foster parents had been at every day of the trial, sitting where we could see them on the monitor. After the verdict, they filed official adoption papers with the court. The social worker wrote a report about how much better we were doing in their care, how my sister was talking more, how we were both gaining weight and sleeping through most nights. The adoption hearing was scheduled for 3 months out. Meanwhile, they enrolled us in the school part-time, just 3 classes each to start. Walking into that building with hundreds of other kids kids were terrifying. I kept forgetting I was allowed to be myself, that I didn't have to pretend to be someone dead. The other students knew something was different about us, but the school had been careful not to share details. We ate lunch in the counselor's office the first few weeks because the cafeteria was too loud and crowded. My sister took art and music along with basic math. I took English, history, and science. The teachers knew our situation and didn't call on us unless we raised our hands. Homework was hard because we'd missed so much school over the years, but our foster parents hired a tutor who came 3 times a week. 2 months after the trial, the counselor suggested I try a support group for trafficking survivors that met at the hospital. I didn't want to go, but our foster mom drove me anyway and waited in the parking lot. There were 6 other people there, all different ages, and when they shared their stories, I realized we weren't alone in losing ourselves. One woman had been forced to work in massage parlors, another had been sold by her boyfriend. They talked about forgetting their real names, about not knowing who they were anymore. We shared tricks for remembering what was real, keeping journals, making lists of true memories, saying our real names out loud every morning. My sister wouldn't go to group, but she found music helped her remember herself. Our foster parents bought her a used guitar, and she'd sit in our room for hours, picking out notes that weren't from any song we'd had to memorize. She started writing simple melodies, just 3 or 4 notes strung together, but they were hers. The adoption hearing happened on a rainy Thursday. The judge asked us if we wanted this, if we felt safe, if we understood what adoption meant. We both said yes immediately. Our foster parents cried when the judge signed the papers. They'd already framed a spot on the living room wall for the certificate, right between their wedding photo and pictures of their biological kids who were grown now. A year after we'd escaped from the Walker house, we were different people. We had friends who knew us by our real names, teachers who encouraged us, parents who protected us instead of selling us. Therapy was still twice a week and probably would be for a long time. The nightmares came less often, but they still came. Sometimes I'd wake up thinking I was in someone else's bed, wearing someone else's life, and I'd have to list real things until I remembered who I was. 6 months after the adoption went through, a package arrived from Mrs. Walker's lawyer. Inside was a letter saying she'd started a foundation in Lily's real name to help trafficking victims, along with a photo of Lily from before everything went bad, smiling at a school dance, alive and happy. Our therapist said we were making remarkable progress, that we'd graduated from intensive therapy to regular sessions, that we had tools now to handle the bad days when they came. Our adoptive parents brought up the name change idea at dinner one night while we were eating spaghetti. They'd been researching the process for weeks and had all the paperwork ready. The courthouse clerk handed us the forms, and we sat there with pens in our hands, staring at the blank lines where we could write any names we wanted, not the ones mom gave us that we'd hated, not the dead girls' names we'd memorized, names that would be ours forever. The way they're piecing themselves back together bit by bit is so interesting, like they're solving a puzzle where half the pieces were someone else's life. What makes certain memories stick even when everything else gets buried under all those fake identities? My sister wrote hers first, her hand steady for once. I picked something simple that felt right when I said it out loud. The judge signed the order without asking any questions, and just like that, we weren't who we used to be anymore. 2 years passed faster than I thought they would. I was filling out college applications when the acceptance letter came with a full scholarship for trafficking survivors. The financial aid office had a whole program I didn't know existed. My hands shook opening the envelope because I'd never imagined getting to plan anything past next week, much less 4 years of education. My sister's acceptance to art school came the same week. She'd submitted a portfolio full of paintings she'd been working on in the garage. Windows and doors, all of them open, all of them leading somewhere bright. The admissions people called her work transformative in their letter. She cried when she read it, the good kind of tears this time. The congressional hearing invitation arrived through our advocate 6 months later. They were working on new laws about trafficking and wanted survivors to testify. The thought of speaking in that huge room with all those people watching made me want to throw up, but other survivors would be there too, all of us making sure people understood this wasn't some rare thing that never happened. We flew to Washington and stayed in a hotel near the Capitol. The hearing room had wood panels and microphones and more people than I'd ever seen in one place. When my turn came, I told them everything. About the funeral directors selling information, about the families who never questioned why grieving parents had perfect replacement daughters, about the GPS trackers and the sedatives and the years of being someone else's ghost. My sister went after me, and even though talking was still hard for her, she got through her whole statement. Other survivors spoke too, each story worse than the last, until the room was completely silent except for our voices. 6 months later, the new laws passed with stronger penalties and mandatory reporting requirements. Our advocate called to say our testimony had been specifically mentioned in the final vote. They'd created a fund for survivors using money seized from trafficking operations. More states were adopting similar laws. We'd helped change things for kids who might end up like us. 3 years after that night at the Walker house, I was halfway through my social work degree. My sister was studying art therapy, learning how to help kids who couldn't talk about their trauma use paint and clay instead. We lived in apartments near our schools, close enough to see each other every week, but far enough to be our own people. I worked part-time at a crisis center answering phones. My sister taught art classes at a youth shelter. We were turning what happened to us into something that could help others. Our adoptive parents threw us a party when we both made Dean's List the same semester. They'd invited our professors and friends from the school. There was cake and those silly graduation caps even though we weren't graduating yet. They took pictures of us holding our grade reports, their faces proud like we were their real kids who'd always been theirs. My sister got into a graduate program for art therapy. I got accepted to an advanced clinical social work program. We were going to be professionals with degrees and licenses and the ability to spot the signs we wished someone had seen in us. Mrs. Walker sent letters through the advocate every few months. She'd started a foundation in Lily's real name that had helped dozens of trafficking victims already. She spoke at conferences about missing the signs, about being complicit through silence, about the cost of not protecting children. She said helping us escape was the beginning of her trying to make things right. right. She couldn't bring Lily back, but she could help other girls get out. 5 years had passed since that night she'd tried to warn me about her husband. We had careers now, real ones with business cards and everything. I worked with trafficking survivors full-time, helping them navigate the system that had saved us. My sister ran art therapy groups at 3 different facilities. We had friends who knew our real names and our real story. We had relationships with people who understood our past but didn't define us by it. We paid our own rent and bought our own food and made our own choices every single day. Sometimes reporters still called about the sister case, wanting updates or exclusive interviews. We told our story once, on our own terms, in that congressional hearing. That was enough. We didn't owe anyone the details of our healing. We weren't the ghost girls anymore. We were ourselves, completely and fully, with our own names and our own lives and our own futures that belonged to nobody but us. Thanks for sticking around and wondering about all this with me today. It's been really interesting sharing these moments together. Like the video, it helps more than you think.